this new offshoot is to explore how the pandemic may reorganize existing structures, to create alternative work and learning arrangements, as well as to think a little bit about how the economy may change in the short term and the long run, and how society in general should adapt to these new realities. So in this video, we're going to be talking a little bit to Professor Martin Kenney about the post-pandemic future of work as it relates to gig work and the gig economy. So why don't you introduce yourself?
So my name is Martin Kenney. I'm a professor of community and regional development at UC Davis. My work over the last 30 years has been on Silicon Valley, the venture capital industry, and the development of the California and US economy and global economy in that respect. Most recently, I've been interested in digital platforms and the impact of digital platforms on the future of work. If you go to my website, there are a number of papers there that are posted regarding what I call the rise of the platform economy. And by the platform economy, I mean the firms like Amazon, Google, Facebook that are restructuring work, the economy, and really the society. And so in that respect, I think this COVID-19 coronavirus crisis is going to change the way work and the way the capitalist economy in general operates. And now, so with that, I think we need to start to think about what does the future look like, and what has the COVID-19 crisis changed, will change, and what probably won't change. So as we think through moving through this crisis and coming out on the other end, what changes and what doesn't.
How do you see the worldwide shelter-in-place influencing usage of online workspaces and impacting new socio-professional connections after the pandemic?
So that's a really a wonderful question. And obviously, we're still we'll be speculating about what is the future. Now, what do we know? What we know is more bandwidth than ever is being used. I mean, it's being used for entertainment, it's being used for conference calls, it's being used to do business, it's being used as classes move online. So that's sort of the first sort of level. So people are getting used to using these technologies at a much more rapid pace than they would have if it was just diffusing naturally, right? And it's, I think, among your generation, the students' generation, the kids in my class, right? 19, 20, 21, 22, you were far more into this digital world than, let's say, somebody who's 40 or someone who's like me who's 60, over 60, right? We were much less willing to use these technologies. Now we're being forced to use Zoom. Conferences or meetings that I would have had in Berkeley, of, for example, Citrus, where I would have driven down to Berkeley, now are all online. My guess is that unless it's a really important meeting, I'll do it online. We were already going that way, but we're being accelerated in that way. I think when we think about classes, this becomes very interesting. Because what is the difference between a class that's online and a class where I'm there physically and you students are all there physically and you meet each other through the class, through classes. You go out for coffee afterwards. You hopefully discuss the professor's papers or work or readings or prepare for the test in person. How much of that do you need still, and will you still need, and how much will now shift online? How much of what I'm going to do in the grading process is now going to shift online, right? I mean, a lot of the grading is already shifted online, but for example, will I set up my office hours completely online, and we'll do them on Zoom? Does that make sense? Is that good? Is it bad? How does that change the interaction process? I don't think we really know this yet, right? And that then will have big impacts on what does the university do. Yeah. And the workplace is the same. I mean, virtual meetings were already, right, used in business all the time, right? So, you know, virtual conferences, be it WebEx, which is a more formal conferencing, Zoom, Skype, all of these various products, right? How much of that will continue, right? Because remember, what we did see in the phase before COVID was people were meeting online more and more, and yet business people were traveling more and more. Those were correlated, not separated and replacing each other. They were highly correlated because people wanted to still meet in person. Is COVID broken that correlation?
Well, that is something interesting that you touched on, which is that there are obviously drawbacks to this sort of remote work and remote meeting with people. Lots of discussion about what are the drawbacks of lacking that face-to-face interaction. We could spend a long time talking about, but one of the things I wanted to ask you is what do you think are the biggest challenges to working remotely like this? What are some of the roadblocks to working remotely like this?
Well, I think there's micro level challenges and shall we say more macro level challenges. The micro level challenges, depending on how the relationship is, I might be multitasking while I'm speaking with you. Does multitasking give us deep information transfer? It's much harder to multitask in person, right? What do I mean by that? I'm speaking with you and you're in front of me texting on your phone. That isn't going to work very well. But certainly in many kinds of remote interactions, I can also be doing something else on my phone right here, right? You know, so you students are already very good in my class in back of pretending you're paying attention, but multitasking on me, right? So that's a very micro thing, but we'll have to think about what is politeness in a world where there's going to be, and we know there's going to be more remote interaction. What does politeness mean in that world? So that's a very micro level. At the macro level, what is the depth of the interactions that we can do completely online? Now, consider if you have a significant other. Do you need to see that significant other, or is it just fine never to see them for 6 months because you're always online? Can relationships take that? Even though today more relationships than ever are starting online, is that sufficient? Online relationships, is it sufficient to keep them whole and strong, right? So I gave the example of sort of more romantic involvement, but for teams, that kind of personal interaction, you may not need as much of it anymore, but people are flying more than ever for that interaction. Why has one of the biggest spreaders of the COVID-19 been conferences? Because people need to go to those conferences to interact, to make those new connections, and and renew old connections. So the Academy of Management, which is one of my sort of business conference, professorial conferences, is going to be in Vancouver in August. They haven't canceled it yet, and people are terrified that it'll be canceled. On the other hand, they're terrified if COVID is going crazy, right? So what is that saying? That we still feel we need that person-to-person interaction. Yeah. So how we come out of this is still unclear. Is a virtual conference good enough? Are virtual relationships for you, us, we as human beings, social beings, is it good enough for us? I don't think so. So that's where I think this issue, this tension will be as we come out of this, because we will have now become more used to these kinds of virtual interactions. But think to yourself, you can get all the music you want. I mean, young people, my students, get all the music you want over YouTube, Spotify, whatever, right? Particular media you want. Does that mean you never want to go to a live performance again? That's a substitute? No, I don't think you'll say that. I think you, so how that balance will change, we can't yet know, but what we do know is that by the end of this, we will become far more used to this form of interaction.
Well, it seems like there will be a balance in the future, that it's going to be some sort of hybrid of in-person mixed with online. It's not going to be one or the other. In your opinion, what do you think an ideal hybrid arrangement could look like that optimizes the benefits of in-person with the benefits of remote?
That's a wonderful question. And I think it's a generational question partly. My generation, again, I'm over 60, is much more that old world of interactions, person to person, interactions, perhaps telephone interaction, not but calling on the phone and hearing the voice that way. I think your world, the world of my students, is a lot more used to that interaction that is more distant, more through the digital media. So that question probably depends generationally, but I would say my generation is now being pulled towards your generation and the way you interact far more quickly than we expected. So what is that balance? I think that balance will depend on what is the particular relationship that you're trying to develop, right? Is it a one-off relationship, or is it a deep relationship that you've had for a very long time, like my relationship with one of my friends, Richard Florida? We know each other because we worked so much together. We can do a lot of the interaction digitally. Right, if we get together, we drink beer, we have dinner, we talk, we chat about the old days, right? Because we already have a deep relationship. Could we develop that deep relationship completely digitally? I don't think so. Could you develop that deep relationship individually? I think you will have to answer that, because you, the people, the students in my class, are going to be the managers and the leaders. You're going to be the managers and leaders. You are going to develop that in your own way, and understand how relationships could work in your own way. This process was going on anyway. COVID has introduced me, my generation, far more quickly to this. At the end of this, my generation, but I think your generation still will want to go to the Academy of Management to meet new people, to run across people in the audience at a session. You're sitting next to someone, what are you doing? Running, or somebody introducing you to someone else. You can do those introductions digitally, but I don't think you can develop that interaction quite as strongly. So what that balance will be, I think human beings will still want to get together at events, various kinds of events. How we'll be able to do that at the end of this is tough to say, but I think the other thing is when you have a revolution or a crisis event, things change, but things also go back to the way they were. So this will depend on how quickly we move through this. In China, they're already taking the masks, they're not taking the masks off, but they're already back in public. So I think that's going to happen in the Western countries also as we move through the crisis. So a lot of things will come back. I, for example, think we will still be in classrooms. Because I think, for example, many of you don't want to be home at 18 and 19. Many of my students in my class are coming from somewhere else, and they left Los Angeles to come to Davis because mom and dad weren't that close. You know, so that will continue to be the fact, and therefore they will need a physical place to go. There's no reason to leave mom and dad if it's all digital. So again, I'm not answering your question, but what I'm kind of throwing this back to you as we will develop this new way of interacting after this, but I wouldn't expect it to be completely radically different, that we all distance from each other forever because of this. That's not going to happen. We're still going to have classrooms. I believe this because we're social beings.
I mean, I could spend all day talking about these online hybrid work arrangements, which is so relevant to students, but I think it is time to switch gears just a little bit and get into your area of expertise. I think the first question that I want to start by asking you is, generally speaking, do you think that increases in gig work as opposed to more stable employment translates to greater economic productivity? And if so, what are the drawbacks?
That's a great question. It has many ramifications to that question. So let's take one of the macro results. Today, if you're a gig worker, if you're a remote worker, let's say on Upwork, you're probably fine. You're continuing to do whatever work you're doing. If you were an in-person gig worker, or let's say an Airbnb host, your business has collapsed. Not only has your business collapsed, but the platform, Airbnb, Uber, or Lyft, have no relationship to you. You're not a worker. So they can just drop you. So what we're seeing in large parts of the gig economy, as work turns down, people are immediately unemployed. And they're unemployed without, many of them without unemployment insurance. They didn't pay in, they weren't employed. They didn't pay into unemployment insurance, right? Unemployment insurance in the United States is shockingly bad, but they are not going to get any unemployment insurance, right? So if you're a gig worker, either on a platform or a gig worker outside a platform, you've collapsed. And if you don't have whatever savings you have, you will eat through, well, again, if you have $1 million in savings, you're okay. But if you have, $10, $15, $20,000 in savings, your work will collapse. Now that's whether you're an Uber driver or a bartender or a barista. Well, a barista is the least employed. A bartender is least employed, but many of them are on very weak contracts. So the other thing, this is a little bit off, but the other thing that the coronavirus, COVID-19, is exposing is the extreme vulnerability of large sectors of our society that aren't taken care of because whatever they get is through their employment. If they have a normal employment relationship, might call it a W-2 relationship. But if you're on a W-2 is the tax form if you're employed that you file. But if you're on a 1099 type of or miscellaneous income, like an Uber driver, 1099K in their case, you're done. So the gig economy, which was both on the platform and off the platforms, is basically collapsing outside of the remote work space, right? If you're an AMT, Amazon Mechanical Turk worker, as long as there's still contracts flowing in, you're fine, right? If you're an Upwork or anywhere in the world, you can work digitally, you're fine. It wasn't a great job, but you are fine in the sense that that work probably is continuing. So when we talk about gig work, there's online and offline gig work, bartenders, et cetera, right? So both of those are happening. And since we in the United States have basically no social safety net, we don't have health care, government provided health care. We don't have government, we have unemployment insurance for those who were employed, not employed, a gig worker, you're finished, right? Now, so it all depends on where you were in relationship and what type of gig work you were, remote work. If it was remote work and the jobs continued, the gigs can continue, you're fine, okay? So I think the thing that Corona is exposing is the neoliberal attitude that we've had towards our workers and our population is now exposed because there's no safety net. And we've been stripping away the safety net since Ronald Reagan, through Clinton, through Bush, through Obama, and now through Trump. So all of that stripping away is now fully exposed, right? Private equity people running hospitals, such the doctors in many hospitals and nurses are gig workers. They can walk away. They'll walk away. Why would I do this as a gig worker? If I'm an employee of the hospital, I'm part of a collective. If I'm a gig worker hired as a nurse, why would I, if I have enough savings, why would I take care of your children, your mother and father, when it's danger to me? I'd walk away. I'm just a gig worker. So this is all now being exposed in our society. So the digital is just a part of this, but a very important part. So as a student graduating, gig now becomes a new, before you graduated and maybe you said, I'll do gigs because I make more money immediately because they're not paying my benefits, right? So I keep the money. And at 23, who cares, right? I'm not going to get sick, right? That belief that young people have, they're not getting sick. Now we're understanding it's getting young people, 23, 17, 30, right? Years old. So now your people are going to start to see what are the benefits of being permanently employed, like me. The university didn't just fire me. Universities kept me on as an institution. Even the large corporations who are laying people off are not laying them off as fast because they have a W-2 relationship to those workers. They can't just do that without a bunch of other things happening. And when the government now wants to pour money into the system, where are they going to pour it? They're going to pour it into the institutions like corporations, like universities, that then will give the money to the W-2 workers. But how do you give money to an Uber driver? How do you do it? There's no way to do that. For young people, that means you need to think very carefully about who you work for and what is their commitment to you.
Yeah. Do you think we're going to see more individuals pushing for unionization in the gig economy as a result of the pandemic?
There are many layers to the problems we're facing in this crisis, and this crisis exposing the way our society is organized, right? So there's a lot of layers to this. Will gig economy workers strike? They probably will. Will they have any protection in the strike process? If you look back at the great unionization waves, where when you had leadership at the highest levels of society that supported unionization. So the last big wave was, of course, the Great Depression, which economically we are on the verge. Now, will it go that way? I don't know. But we are on the verge of Great Depression because remember, COVID exposed the bubbles in the stock market, all of these bubbles, right? So these bubbles are collapsing at the same time, right? The stock market bubble, right? Which the central bank helped blow, right? So these are all collapsing at the same time. And so, again, this exposes the issues. But if you don't have leaders at the top level who say unionization is good, we want workers to get together to ask for more of the pie, right? In the Great Recession under Obama, Obama's decision was to give the money not to the workers, but to the banks. That was his decision. Instead of giving to the poor and the weak, he gave to support the rich, right? So nothing changed. So the bubbles started blowing again, got bigger and bigger. And now you have a COVID virus, much more serious than the collapse of the bubble, particularly in the housing market, right, in the last crisis. Mm-hmm. This is much more serious because it hits all parts of the society and all the bubbles simultaneously. There's a housing bubble, there's a stock bubble, there's a junk bond bubble. They're all being hit simultaneously. So what we need is a comprehensive plan which includes unionization, which includes caring about the weakest in our society, right? Edgar Allan Poe had this wonderful, The Masque of the Red Death, right, where the rich were partying as the plague was moving through the poor outside the castle. And then, of course, the disease came into the castle, right? And started to affect them too. So if we make this decision, a social decision, that we're just going to try to bail this out, get through, and we're not going to change anything, we're going to become vulnerable to this kind of crisis again. So that goes back to unionization, goes back to the gig workers, goes back to the weaker workers in our society. We have to find ways to ensure that they are under the social safety net. And because we are going to go more and more to work that goes through platforms, what I call platform-dependent entrepreneurship in a recent paper, this becomes an absolutely critical issue because platforms are organizing and reorganizing more and more of the work and competition in our society. So that's, again, a long-winded answer to a very great and difficult question that we need all to think about socially. So.
Well, I agree with what you're saying, but I'm also seeing estimates that there's going to be a sharp increase in individuals temporarily flocking to gig work, whether that's something that they ultimately want to do or if it's ultimately best for them, because they need to make some immediate money in the aftermath of this pandemic. Mm-hmm. They don't necessarily have any intention to stay in this kind of work. If that ends up happening and you see this sharp increase in people flocking to gig work, what do you think could be the long-term consequences of this shift?
So again, depends on how we react to this. I think you're right. More people are likely to flock to gig work. Now, you could flock to Uber now, but if nobody's using Uber, you can't flock there. I think, again, it's back to, if people flock to gig work, the societal reaction has to be to improve gig work. And improve gig work is probably through a national healthcare system. That's one way. Through various measures that allow the gig worker to have more power in that relationship. Today, nurses have a lot of power. The nurses threaten to go on strike today, and they will get benefits, right? So what you have to do always is change the power relationship. Now, having said that, what are the kinds of micro-level things if a young person wanted to become a gig worker today? I think gig worker of Uber, Lyft, Airbnb are all possibilities, but I think you have to think about, could you set up a store on Amazon that starts to sell something? I'm not saying selling masks or medical equipment. That's not right, not legal right now, and Amazon's not allowing that. But starting businesses on Amazon and thinking there, this much more micro level, of how do you create a real business that will work and that gives you some opportunity, right? Moving people to your own website, right? Selling things. I mean, again, this, I'm not saying that this is going to solve the problems. This may create some income. So I think we're going to see more of that, people selling things on Amazon, et cetera, as we come out of this crisis. Whether that's a solution, I don't think so. But for young people, you know, if they can find a good market niche on Amazon, and then, as I write about in Platform-Dependent Entrepreneurs, create their own website to escape from Amazon, this could be offer significant business opportunities. YouTube, very hard to make it on YouTube, but there are possibilities there if you're inventive, innovative, and can create a viral channel. So there are possibilities here. And the thing about digital is that digital is such a generative technology that if you can figure out good ways, a new app, et cetera, for an app store, you can create new businesses that provide income. Gaming, right, is another area. And, you know, Twitch gaming, if you can be a good Twitch gamer, maybe you could make a business there. These are all very high risk businesses, but there are many new opportunities arising because platforms allow inventive folks to develop new business models, right? New apps. There are parts of the app that are already out there. You can get Google Maps and insert it into your app, and now you have a geographical component. So these are a lot of possibilities here. Whether they are sufficient to overcome the crisis at the macro level, I don't know. But at the micro level, there's opportunity. Today, of course, there's opportunity for entrepreneurial young people or old people, whomever, entrepreneurial people.
Well, this situation that you're describing where individuals or small businesses are either spawned from this pandemic or experience growth from this pandemic, do you think they're going to be able to sustain themselves after the pandemic is over? Do you think that's a sustainable strategy?
Well, I mean, sustainable strategies today are strategies that evolve with the changes and for people that are able to see the future or create the future, right? So is it a sustainable strategy to, and I'll be a little bit silly here, to sell N95 masks, to sew and sell masks for N95? Is that a sustainable strategy? Probably not. Is that a strategy that potentially could get your website, your Amazon store going, and then you would evolve with the changes in the marketplace? Yeah, potentially yes. COVID-19 app to tell you our COVID-19, is somebody with COVID-19 close to you, a proximity app. Is that going to work when the COVID crisis is over? Probably not. But maybe that proximity app could then be evolved into the new Tinder. I mean, again, these are the kinds of innovative things that I would expect some of our young entrepreneurs to develop. Again, will this be a macro level solution? Probably not. Could it be a micro level solution? Absolutely.
Yeah, I have a question based off of a lot of what you've been saying. So all of these social transformations you've been discussing that are tied up in both policy and culture, this issue of bundling social services with employment status, the economic problems that have been exposed by the pandemic, what advice would you give to students who want to make a difference, who want to help usher in a new status quo? What avenues should they explore? Entrepreneurship, working in government and trying to change things from the inside out, private sector, nonprofits.
Again, there's so many directions, and our young people, the young people, have so many great ideas. So is entrepreneurship a direction? Sure, potentially. Is the political realm a direction? Yes, potentially, working at the ground level. We are having young people, 26, 27, 28, 29, getting on city councils and demanding change, right? And pushing for change. One of our wonderful students, one of my graduates, Katie Valenzuela, just got on the Sacramento City Council. She's going to be a voice for change. She's going to push them, right? And I'm not saying that she or any of us have the answers, but I think as we start to push this old gerontocracy that we have in this country, that is slow, resistant to change, uninterested in greater income equality. They speak like they're interested, but they're not interested. They don't show no behavior that shows an interest. So the political realm, the government realm, all of these realms are important. And the digital is giving you tools, giving all of us tools to interact together to push for change inside firms, push for change from the outside to the inside of firms. So digital tools, these digital tools have many facets to them. One is they can be more oppressive, more for surveillance, etc., more for creating the gig economy. On the other hand, they can help organize, help us organize to bring about change, to discuss change, to push for change. So all tools always have many different facets, and they can be tools for change, or they can be tools to keep the system the way they are. And struggling over those tools and using those tools, I think, is very important. Gig workers can use these tools to organize, to change the conditions of their employment. However, we also need to think about, is the ownership pattern we have for today's platforms the correct ownership pattern? Should it be a different ownership pattern? Should it be cooperatives? Should we organize them as cooperatives? Should we organize them as municipal utilities or national utilities? Right? These are all possible and need to be discussed and hopefully voted on.
I want to ask you one question that's very student specific as we start to wrap this up. What advice would you give to graduating college seniors or those graduating in 2020? And an offshoot of that question is for students that are considering PhD programs, students that are considering professional school or other terminal master's degrees, as well as people that are considering riding out this potential recession in graduate school. So perhaps they weren't considering it now, but are planning on doing so given the changes with the pandemic. Just general broad advice you have for graduating college students.
It's a great question. So obviously graduate school this September is already closed, I think. I mean, you might be able to rush an application in the next week or two, because by May it's completely over. So if you haven't applied for graduate school, I don't think that's going to happen. You're not going to get in June, and they may have acceptances for January, but most schools don't. So the question is, what can you do in the interim? You're going to have a year. If it's a gap year, well, it's a gap year. Well, we haven't in the United States called for volunteerism. Some countries have massively called for volunteers to help out in the pandemic. The Italians have done that and gotten a great turnout to deliver food for those who are homebound, quarantined, et cetera, or trying to organize, and there's already people doing that, organizing groups like that is certainly not a bad idea. Having the experience of organizing things, right, as a volunteer, whatever, of creating innovative solutions in this gap year will, I think, make you very attractive for a graduate school, right? And graduate school to ride out a recession can be a good idea, depending on how long the recession is, depending on how many slots there are, depending on where you go to graduate school. But writing it out in disciplines get a PhD in a discipline which has basically no jobs may not be the wisest thing. There are, I don't want to, I would get in trouble if I named disciplines that today their graduates cannot get jobs under normally and have PhDs, and therefore are driving for Uber. I'm not sure that's a wise investment of their time, and particularly of their money, if they actually paying for it instead of being paid as a TA to get through. So I would use this gap year. If you can get a good job, get the job, and then make the decision down the road. So if in June you graduate, you have a job, any job your family gives you, any job, right? You take that job. You learn from it. You do the best job, best work possible. You and build something, and then you decide in December, do I still want to continue on with this work that I got, this job that I've got, this even volunteer activity I have? If you can afford to be a volunteer, and many of our graduates coming out, they come from families that aren't so wealthy. They can't just sit at home and hope for the best, right? So I would say start to create something, either in your job, or if you have to do it in a volunteer sense, etc., using the resources that you can mobilize, family, friends, etc. And then in January, December, when you need to apply, make that decision. Do I want to continue on with this? Does this have the career, the direction that I want? Or do I need to go to either a professional school or for a PhD or for a terminal master's, right? And what is the cost benefit? How much am I going to pay? And what is the return? How will this enable me, to, again, actualize my dreams or actualize, the future that I want? I wouldn't rush into any of these graduate degrees because I have nothing else to do. I don't think that's advisable. And at the other end of this, you may just be somebody with a master's degree who has less experience, but is more expensive. Why would an organization hire you with a master's degree when you cost more and you've had no real professional experience? They're not going to do that, right? Because when we come out of this, firms are going to be hiring, whomever is hiring, is going to be looking at the bottom line much, much more carefully than they did, and they were already very serious 2 years ago or a year ago or even 6 months ago. So that would be my advice. Think each of these possible paths through very carefully. Speak with your professors. Speak with people in the sector that you're interested in, that you may or know. If you want to be a planner, you should probably join the American Planning Association. They have student and non-employed rates in any of the professions, nursing, etc., that you may want to go into. Do that if you can, if you have the resources to be able to do that. You've got to try to use those resources and remain as poised as possible in a situation of turbulence, so that you can move flexibly in any direction that opens up for you.
Yeah, that is great advice. Very inspiring.
Thank you.
And I've got one last question to wrap this whole thing up.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier on Richard Florida's book, Creative Class, which was groundbreaking in defining changes vis-a-vis the entrepreneurial platform gig economy. Just for fun, what will the title of the next book be that captures the nature of work changes post-pandemic? You can take a second to think about that.
What a wonderful, and I wish I was Rich Florida, and I've been interacting with him quite a bit, emails in the last week or two. So let me tell you, this is going to be public, so I need to be careful here because Rich is a very close friend of mine. There's going to be a question about urbanization, because the urban areas have been hit very hard. The suburban areas far less hard because of the very nature of the suburbs. The creativity of the city that Rich captures very, very well is in a social distancing world is in fact in question. If I have to social distance myself from you, I'm not rubbing elbows. The Michael Storper, roundaboutness, the Richard Florida creativity. Can this exist in the same way? And why would I live in a city if I have to distance myself anyway? So how much of a shock is this? And how much does this shock change how we live in the urban sense? The other thing that Rich was already onto in some of his more recent writings is it was becoming increasingly impossible for the baristas and the artists to live in San Francisco. I mean, outside of the elite artists, or New York City. The loft thing is over in New York City. Maybe it's still going on in the Bronx, but it had slowed down. COVID is going to give this a real smash. It's going to smash that, and it's going to make people rethink that. So So you might, so the simple one is, what is creativity and urbanization in the post-COVID environment? The other one that's sort of more is, he called it the creative class. How much of this creative class will survive this in the same way, right? Because this creative class were the consultants, the artists, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, they weren't, he included people like me, the professors who have real jobs, et cetera, et cetera. But how much of that class of people will survive this economically? Because they're cut off. That business is, most of that stuff is just ended abruptly about 3 weeks ago. If this goes on for another 3 months, they're going to be shaken out. And many of them won't come back, and they'll be replaced by younger people like you, right? So I think, again, maybe you can help me with the title here, because it's asking, and many people are already, of course, trying to write this, including Richard Florida, but Richard Florida's argument is going to come back. Remember, we've got two crises here. We've got COVID, and we've got the economic crisis. We don't have one, we have two crises. If COVID gets solved, and it will, probably by August, things will come back to normal there. The economic part of this is unlikely to be solved. And the economic part is, Rich Florida is writing in this long upturn, which you might call a bubble. There's the dot-com bubble. Remember, he starts writing about this with the Gay Index in 1994. And then that becomes the creative class. Then we have the dot-com crisis, which is a cutback, but then we come back very strongly based on the mortgage bubble, et cetera. Then we have the 2008-9 crisis, which again hits the creative class, but we have the asset inflation by the Fed Reserve taking interest rates down. So we have the big asset inflation. Now that asset inflation, right? Not LSD. Sorry, I'm showing my age. Right, so we have, and that also is being deflated. So I think as you young people are thinking about this, COVID is the giant, not pin that did the balloon, popped the balloon, but a giant spike that popped the balloon, right? Or a nuclear bomb thrown into a munitions warehouse and blew the whole thing up. So your students need to be thinking, my students, us, even me, but us, need to be thinking about what is it we're going to do about the economic downturn that's coming, right? That's where the problem is for your students. That's where the entrepreneurship, and that's where the social change is. So the title is something along, both of these, the economic crisis and the COVID, maybe the pin, the pop the balloon. What is the future of entrepreneurship? What is the future of creativity and entrepreneurship?
Yeah.
How does it get expressed in the recovery? And the recovery will come. And how do you, young students of mine, participate and help create that recovery that we all need, we all want? And how do we help you do that? And again, I'm not not a title for the next book, but it's out there. It's out there. The recovery's out there, but we need to understand how, as a globe, we're going to make that recovery, because this is a global crisis. Like climate, we've forgotten about climate. We haven't talked about that. Climate. These are global crises, and the United States is acting like it's not a part of the globe. So the solutions also are global solutions, right? And you have to think globally. Creative class is a creation of a bubble that starts the dot-com bubble, right? And you get this one, and now you've got the middle one there, the 2008-9, and you have this. I think that this crisis, like the Great Depression, is going to change trajectories. That's what we need to think about. So the question then is, not a creative class, that's the construction of the past. That doesn't mean creativity is not important, but that's a construction of the past. I mean, it was great. Rich was brilliant. But what is the construction of the future? Is it look at, I'm going to say some kind of radical things here. Look at what the Chinese have done. They've stopped it. The Chinese economy is going to recover faster than the American economy. That's for sure. Do we want a Chinese solution for the world? If you're in Vietnam, or if you're in Thailand, or if you're in Indonesia, or you're in Africa, and you're looking at what the Americans are doing, you're looking at what the Chinese are doing, which system would you choose? You're not choosing to be out in suburban Davis. That's not your choice if you're in Africa. Your choice is to die in true squalor or get a Chinese solution. You may see it that way. I'm not saying you should see it that way. But the Chinese look competent. Do you really think the Americans or the Italians have looked competent in this crisis? The South Koreans have looked competent. They're they're democratic society. The Japanese have looked, Singapore is a little more disciplinarian, but democratic, has looked competent. Hong Kong has looked competent. When you look at Italy, I love Italy. I go there I love it.
I know you do.
Great people and a great society. But no Italian's going to tell you this has looked competent. Do you think the chaos in the US government has looked competent? Or in the UK government? People are looking at this around the world and saying, give me a solution. And I'm not saying we need the Chinese solution in the United States. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the rest of the world is thinking about this. Who sent aid to Italy? Did the US send aid to Italy? Did they send aid to France? No, they confiscated the French masks. That's what we did.
Yeah.
Do you really think? So really, we need to develop a society that the rest of the world respects and sees as a society that's an emblem of the future, not a relic of the past that isn't competent. I mean, we have not looked competent here. I don't think so. And I'm not saying, and I don't think that Obama would have been more competent. He would have been more competent than this group. But so there's some profound global issues that this double crisis, that might be the book, The Double Crisis. Creativity and entrepreneurship in the double crisis. Corona and the probably collapse in the stock market. And with the United States being such a stock market centric country, a very severe economic downturn, despite the $1 trillion that they're going to spend. They're going to need a lot more money than that. They're going to need money like on a World War II, Great Depression level. That's the apocalyptic. Let's hope we're not going there. And we have tools to not go there. We do have the tools, and this most recent $1 trillion bailout was a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
But just a step.
Just a step. Well,
anyway, I've gone on and on, and I apologize for that, but I've thought a lot about this stuff.
It shows.
I
I
thank
thought
you
that
so much
I thought
for,
that was great.
yeah, cannot speak for myself, but you did great. You were excellent. I thought
You
this
guys did a great job.
was
And thanks. Let's do some more of these, not with me, but with other people who might have opinions that are interesting.
I thought this was a really excellent way to kick it off. If you were watching this and you have any suggestions for ways that we can improve and ways that we can make these better, please send us an email at futureofwork.ucdavis.edu. We will be sending announcements about upcoming interviews and when interviews get posted to subscribers of our mailing list, which you can find links to on our website, futureofwork.ucdavis.edu. And please submit questions. We love to get questions from students so that these can be student-driven interviews. So.